Graffiti has been around in all different parts of the world in one form or another, whether it was, you want to consider the cave paintings in Lascaux on down. People, by the time they had walls, they were writing on them. Early in the United States, beginning really in the antebellum years, people began to write on boxcars that would roll from coast to coast. In the hobo years of the Depression, that became even more prominent. There was always gang graffiti dating back to the 30s and 20s in Los Angeles and other parts of California, the Southwest. There was name-based graffiti all over the place. There was Kilroy was here, which actually sprung out of a suburb of Boston, oddly enough, and became this kind of global icon for the greatest generation. But when this odd combination of name and fame came together in the late 1960s in both Philadelphia and New York, it really exploded. And what was so magical and so important in the history of American graffiti were the years really 1971 to 1975 in New York. And what happened was a generation of kids, and it's really important to remember that. These were kids. There was almost nobody over the age of 19 involved in this. Developed a whole art form that went from a simple signature, just Joe was here kind of thing, all the way up to a mural that covered the entire side of a subway car. And this was something that had just never been seen in art history before, an entire movement just completely developed by kids.
Graffiti.
We all who have that inner kid in us still can retain that appeal of what graffiti is, this just amazing amount of line and color that is in a public space. And then just the whole, how did they do that kind of factor. Graffiti is the rock and roll of visual art. It came from America and it spread throughout the world. It took over the world. There have been very few American art forms that have lasted as long as graffiti, whether you're talking abstract expressionism or anything. The heyday of those periods was really maybe a decade at best in some cases. Graffiti keeps going after 40 years, and now that there's a public interest in graffiti, you have to capture that moment as historians.
Everyone will tell you a different answer to if their goal of writing graffiti is to become famous and go into a gallery, or if their goal is just to write their name as many places as they can and get better at it and paint more trains, paint more walls, paint more freeway signs. Everyone has a different reason. Graffiti's real explosion into the gallery and art world started in New York in the early 80s. And it was the cool new thing to buy. That whole movement definitely was the real early gallery movement where graffiti artists were able to transfer their works into the gallery and make a living from it, and some of them still are. Graffiti at its purest, at its rawest, at its best, and the true definition of graffiti is illegal. Illegal art on a wall, for me, that's what it means. It works best on the street, it works best under a bridge, it works best on a train rolling by you, and that's what it is. It's great that so much of it's been documented and you can show its historical relevance through different cities and different movements, but bringing it into galleries and museums is hard to do. But there's several artists dozens, hundreds, probably thousands that have made the transformation from things they've learned on the street and been able to bring it into galleries and into museums and still make their work as exciting, if not more exciting, than it was on the street because of the extended mediums they have to work in and the time they have to do it.
For artists that work both indoors and outdoors as they grow older, whether it's in galleries or museums, there's always there is a difference, of course, but it's a question of audience, it's a change in audience. And then the other thing is that working indoors, there's some good things to that. You can do things like make more money. You can do things like not have to have your stuff be taken down by weather or the elements or a vigilant graffiti buff. So there's pluses and minuses. You get to spend more time on it. You get to work on projects you couldn't do out in the street. So they're basically just two different creatures. But the thing is that graffiti tends to attract some incredibly talented people who have incredibly big ambitions. You can't just go in and think you're going to do a little bit. If you have to go whole hog. And the people who go into graffiti and they want to go inside, they tend to have good ideas on the inside as well, and very big ambitions.
If you're a really good graffiti artist, you're going to work with your setting. You're going to look at the city differently. You're going to see a rooftop. You're going to see a spot someone else might not have seen, and you're going to work with the city. So if you're really good at that and really good at choosing your color palettes and making that work, there's a good chance you're going to become a better artist at the same time, you know, because you're going to have the same train of thought when you're working in the studio.